Okay, we're on your Gimel Amud Beis 13b. So where we are now is the Gemara is now going to elaborate on the last of the people mentioned in the Mishnah with respect to measure for measure. Right, the Gemara, the Mishnah told us about the Sotah being measure for measure, the law of the Sotah, and the law that she goes through, the ritual she goes through is measure for behavior. And then from there, the Mishnah said the same thing is true of people in history, both from the positive and the negative. And the Mishnah told us of various different characters like that. Shimshon, Miriam, Yosef, Moshe, and I'm missing some others. And the Gemara went through the details of each of their stories. So we finished with the story of Yosef's burial and then Yaakov's burial, right? Because first Yaakov's burial, Yosef buried his father at the sign of respect, and measure for measure, Moshe Rabbeinu buried him. So we went through both stories, first Yaakov's burial and then Yosef's burial. And then we have Moshe Rabbeinu's burial. He's the last on the list, who was buried by Hashem himself. So we're about to get into the story of Moshe Rabbeinu. But before that, the Gemara makes a comment. First, the final comment about Yosef, which kind of closes the subject of Yosef, and then an introductory comment about the story of Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, the introductory comment from the Gemara about the story of Moshe Rabbeinu, I can see why it belongs here, from my limited understanding. But the closing remarks the Gemara is about to make with regard to Yosef, I'm trying to figure out why it's here, right? And I'm going to open the floor to that. Because it seems just I'll read the comment in a second, but the Gemara basically goes back to the beginning of Yosef's story, makes a comment about it, and then that's the end of the story of Yosef, which is like a kind of funny. We're describing the end of Yosef's life, his burial, right? And then the Gemara goes back and makes a comment about the beginning of his life. And then that's the end of the subject of Yosef, which is kind of interesting because we didn't talk about the beginning of his life at all. We only talked about the end. And we only talked about the beginning of his life in relation to the end. Like, for example, why Yosef died early, because he took a leadership position. Right? That was the last comment we had. Or why Yosef was called Bones even in his lifetime. That's in relation to his burial. So it's funny now that the Gemara is going to go back and make a comment about the beginning of his life. And I don't know why. I'm just opening the floor to that. Okay, so let's do the Gemara's comment. It's before halfway, maybe a third way down from the top of the page. The line begins with the word Yosef. Then there's colon, 2 dots, and it says Yosef Hurad Mitzrayim.
Yud Beis Amud Beis?
Yud Gimel Amud Beis 13b. Okay, so Yosef Hurad Mitzrayim. You have it there? No, it's back up there somewhere.
Okay. Oh yeah, with the star, the circle.
Yosef Hurad Mitzrayim. So go up a few more lines.
Oh yeah, here.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, so the verse says Yosef Hurad Mitzrayim, and Yosef was taken down to Egypt. This is when Yosef is sold into slavery, taken down into Egypt, and sold to Potiphar, the minister of Pharaoh, the one who would take care of the Sarat HaBachim, the one who would take care of the Yosef's Pharaoh's butchery. Is that the word? Butchery? Okay. So the verse is Yosef, sorry? Abattoir, yeah. The Yosef Hurad Mitzrayim. Yosef was taken down to Egypt. This is the verse.
Is this
the verse
about Yosef?
So this is the last comment the Gemara makes about Yosef, going back to the beginning of his story. Right. Which again, I'm not sure why. Let's see if we can think of something. So the Yosef Hurad Mitzrayim, Yosef was taken down to Egypt. Rabbi Lezer says, Al Tikri Hurad, don't read it as he was taken down to Egypt. Ella, rather read it, Hurad, he took down. Meaning that upon his arrival, he took down the leaders of Egypt. He took them down. Namely, Shahidid Ixtinige Pari Magadlosan. He took down the astrologers, the diviners, that's the word, people who see the future of Pharaoh from their greatness.
That's Ixtinige.
Ixtinige means literally like stargazers.
Yeah.
So he took them down, right? Because when Pharaoh has a dream and none of Pharaoh's advisors can come up with a solution, interpretation that satisfied Pharaoh, Yosef did. So by doing so, he took them down. So when the verse said that Yosef was taken down to Egypt, literally that's what happened. He was taken down. But in his arrival, he took down too. First comment from the Gemara today. Now, further to that verse, the verse then reads, "Vayikneu Potifar Sris Pare," that Potifar, the minister of Pharaoh, purchased Yosef. Right? Yosef was taken out to Egypt and he was purchased by Potifar. That's the verse. So explains the Gemara. Amar Rav says, "Shekanuhu la'atzmai." He bought him for himself. That is to say, he didn't just buy him to work in his shop, but he bought him because of how beautiful he was, and he wanted to engage with him intimately, homosexually. This is what Potiphar wanted, married man, but it doesn't matter. He wanted Yosef for himself.
He wanted him and his wife wanted him.
Yeah. So it comes out they both wanted him. Makes for a very complicated relationship going on here.
Didn't we learn earlier in Sotah that when a man, if a
Man is jealous of his
woman
wife.
is seeking other pleasures outside her marriage, he has to look at himself to see.
Right.
Really?
So maybe she's looking at Yosef because he is looking at men.
Outside of.
Maybe he was looking at men, so she was also looking at men. Maybe that's what's going on, yeah. I guess if he's looking for men and he's not interested in his wife, maybe that's why she's looking also. Yeah, that's very possible. That would take us back to the Sotah, yeah. Interesting, yeah. Good point. Thank you. So the Gemara then says, now the way Potiphar is referred to as minister is the word sardis. The word sardis can also mean someone who's been castrated. So the Gemara therefore says, Ba Gavriel, the angel Gavriel came, the Sirsite, and castrated Potiphar to prevent him from engaging with Yosef. So there's different levels of castration. And the Gemara says, Ba Gavriel, but Gavriel came, Upiroi, Meikara, and Piroi, and did an even deeper castration. I'm not sure which one's what. Like, is it like a vasectomy and then there's a complete removal? I'm not exactly sure what these levels of. Let's see if Rashi gives us some other.
Just rendered his ineffective.
He rendered him ineffective, yes, but there's two levels of this, and one is sardis and one is pira, and both of them are alluded to in this verse because, first of all, when he's called sardis pare, like a minister of Pharaoh, he's referred to the word sardis, which also has before translated as castrated on some level, and then there's the word pira. Now, where's that alluded to? This deeper castration, this further castration. Where's that alluded to in the verse? Because the Gemara said, the Gemara tells us, Mikara Ksiv, initially, he is referred to as Potiphar. Basoif later is referred to as Potifera. Those extra letters, Fera, is the same root word as that other castration, which is even worse. So this is the Gemara's closing comments on the story of Yosef. Why is it here? And what's it related to Yosef's death? I'm not sure. But we could say it's something like this. I mean, the flow would be something like this. The last comment before this was that the reason why Yosef died early is because he took a position of leadership. Right? And him taking a position of leadership, I mentioned this before, is either the ego and therefore he's punished, or just taking on leadership itself ages the person because of the stresses that come along with that. So having talked about his leadership, the Gemara gets to a comment as to how he got his leadership. He got his leadership by having this prophet, by knowing how to see the future. And by doing that, he took down the leaders of Egypt. So maybe that's why the Gemara is leading. But the Gemara the comment before that was that Yosef had this position of leadership. So the Gemara now gets to the verse that talks about him getting to leadership. And then since we're on the verse talking about how he got to leadership, it also talks about the rest of the verse, which is how Potiphar wanted him and Potiphar was castrated. That seems to be like the tangential flow of the conversation. But at any rate, I'd like to see something deeper as to what exactly is going on here. Why? Meaning, there's other ways in which you can communicate the Yosef ascent to power. For example, you could have commented on the verses about him actually predicting the future. Why comment in the verse which talks about him going down to Egypt, which also implies they took down the leaders of Egypt? That's what I'm asking. Look, it's a very kind of interesting way the Gemara leads into this conversation. This is the end of the comments from Yosef. So it's interesting. Wait, how old was Yosef when he passed? I don't remember.
Less than Moshe's age, was Moses Moshe Rabbeinu was also.
When he died?
Yeah.
No, he's over 100 already.
He was.
Yosef was over 100 for sure. I don't remember exactly 130 something. Something my head says 130 something. Look it up in the verse. It's there. Have a look. It's the end of Parshas Miketz. It's probably there. Or maybe on end of Vayechi. It's got to be in here.
Just Google it.
Yeah, it says
So
here.
he was
Google
older
it
than
too.
Moshe Rabbeinu then.
Moshe Rabbeinu was 120, right?
Yeah.
Here, Vayechi Yosef, 110. I open it right to the right place. Vayechi Yosef made the Esem Shana. Yosef lived for 110 years. So it's 10 years less than Moshe Rabbeinu, and I guess it's 10 years less than his brothers, who lived 120, I suppose.
So
Wow.
he lost 10 years essentially. If you
It also
look
says
on-
here Meikara too. That's like a.
Mekar means in the first instance.
Oh, okay. Not
Mekar,
pregnant.
no, in the first instance.
What's the word for pregnant? I'm thinking of.
Sorry?
Carrot. No.
Pregnant?
Yeah. In Hebrew.
Akara means someone who can't give birth, actually.
Oh, okay. Right.
The opposite.
Right.
It's a woman who's infertile.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, so this is the Gemara's comments here, which is, okay, I'm actually going to stop over here because the next Gemara, we'll start Moshe Rabbeinu's story tomorrow clean. But anyway, the floor is open as to what the Gemara is trying to relay here and what's related to the idea of measure for measure and what's related to.
I don't remember reading about him seeing into the future.
Yosef.
Yeah.
He interpreted the dream.
He interpreted a dream.
Right, that's what I meant by seeing in the future. That he predicted the future better than the Egyptian opponents.
Only in a dream.
Right, but the Gemara is commenting that as Yosef predicted the future, the Egyptians who were supposed to lost their status.
Yeah, of course.
Right, and that seems to be a connection between the previous statement, because the last statement was Yosef died early because of his taking on leadership. So the Gemara is now commenting on the fact of how he got leadership, and that when he got leadership, it took down the Egyptians. Right? So maybe the Gemara is commenting that even though, maybe this is what's happening, even though Yosef took the position of leadership, which caused him to have a shorter life, it was necessary considering the fact that in his ascent to leadership, he took down the evil Egyptians. And that was, meaning like this is the trade-off, so to speak. Like even though he died early as a result of his leadership, so maybe he shouldn't have taken leadership. So the Gemara is commenting and saying, no, his taking leadership is what took down the Egyptians, which is important.
Wait, how did he take down the Egyptians?
Because by him predicting the future correctly to Pharaoh and the other ministers not, they lowered their position. So he took down their position. So maybe this is the Gemara's way of saying that notwithstanding the risks and the consequences of taking on leadership was necessary. Maybe that's why the Gemara is bringing up this comment here.
There's been a lot of jealousies there.
With Yosef. Right, so that would explain, getting back to your, remember we kept asking about why the Egyptians forgot about Yosef? That's why they were jealous. So while he was around, they couldn't do anything. And as soon as he's gone, this is not an uncommon thing, unfortunately. You have this in families too, unfortunately, where someone in the family dies and all of a sudden, all the people who were jealous and weren't saying anything while this person was alive, all of a sudden, all these issues come bubbling to the fore.
Power struggles in biblical history.
Certainly.
Going in and all these families
Certainly.
killing.
When someone dies, all of a sudden, you start taking advantage. So the fact that they, so all of these, like you're saying, they're jealous of Yosef, that would contribute to why, as soon as he was died, they made as if they never heard of him and started torturing his people. Right?
That would have taken years off his life too. People always trying to, jealous of you and trying to do better than you. And
Maybe that's the connection then. The Gemara just finished saying that leadership shortened his life. The Gemara is explaining why. Because in his ascent to leadership, he had the struggles with all these people who were jealous of him. Plus, someone like Tifar got castrated because of him. People wanted his political power. People wanted him sexually. So maybe that's what the Gemara is commenting. The Gemara is explaining why leadership shortened his life because of all the pressures of jealousies of his owner, jealousy of his rivals. So maybe that's why the Gemara is bringing this commentary to explain background as to why his leadership ended his life early. That would explain that. Yeah, that's very nice. Thank you. Oh, so there you go. See, I opened up not knowing. Now I know. See, look at that. This is why I like to do this. Okay.
I wonder if Potiphar's voice changed. That's what happens when you get castrated.
Yeah.
I think it prevents changing now. Or is it?
Church-
I am not a
church-
biologist of this nature. I have no idea.
The church used to castrate all
It
these
prevents
kids.
the
So they
growth.
have fibrosis and-
We-
Oh,
They say that
Yeah,
about
I
people
know,
in the
it
hol
works
in of what's his name in Auschwitz. What's his name? Mengele.
right.
He did such experiments like that and it caused such.
Wow.
Anyway, have a wonderful day, Yidden. Happy to be here.
Yeah.
Happy to learn Gemara with our fellow Yidden. Even the Ashkafa Pratis had it that we're here, so we're here.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful day, Yidden. Tomorrow we're going to pick up the story of Moshe Rabbeinu.